I was invited to the opera by a good friend of mine. I'd never been to the opera, and we sat in the he invited a group of us, and we sat in the cheapest seats. And during the intermission, I was standing in the balcony and looking out at these chandeliers, and I immediately knew what the chandeliers were. They were the product of a famous 150 or 200-year-old family company named Lobmeyr in Vienna. And the reason why I knew about them is because Lobmeyr manufactures, and still does today, some incredible objects made by some of the founding early modernist pioneers like Joseph Hoffmann or Adolf Loos or Oskar Hertel. And I had been I had already made some large installations about that history. I knew that these chandeliers were sort of the masterwork of this company. And when I was just staring at them, they're like looked to me like a big explosion. And I thought, wow, it looks like some pop image of the Big Bang. It sort of looks like a Warhol or Lichtenstein version of the Big Bang, a cartoon of the Big Bang. And I just thought, wow, there are these huge objects very far away. Wouldn't it be interesting to actually have them like essentially on the ground so you could look at them up close? And I thought, and it was very apparent looking at them that they were put together with essentially the grand tradition of flower arranging. They're put something here, put something there. Does that look good? Add something more there. They were clearly put together with a subjective and aesthetic point of view. And I thought, well, just this idea popped in my head as I was standing there in the balcony. What if you instead made every one of those decisions based on the actual science of cosmology? And so it's just this crazy observation, recognition, and then this idea. And then so years later, after multiple failed attempts, I was able to actually do exactly that. So I made this thing that looks like a giant explosion. Basically, it opens with a sound, and it's a roar, and basically that sound is the sound of the Big Bang, essentially. It's a translation of the cosmic microwave background radiation into an acoustic sound. So there's oftentimes when you hear noise, like there's, you could have a hiss or a hum, but then there's also things that are called white noise and pink noise, which are which we're very familiar with just because we hear it in our lives. And they're essentially an equal noise, like basically over the acoustic spectrum there, it's all essentially the same. This roar is not that, and if you compare it to pink noise or white noise, it's not the same. It has a strange harmonics in it that are based on actually registering the frequency spectrum or temperature spectrum of the radiation left over from the beginning of the universe. And then it opens with the title Island Universe, which is supposed to just be evocative. And it goes back to Immanuel Kant, who's the person who first essentially poses that we are not the center of the universe in the most extreme way possible, which is the truth, which is that we are an island among many, many, many other islands. And that, that our galaxy or our universe maybe even is just one amongst many, which is understandably a humbling idea. And then it has 5 chapters, and each one is titled like Small Scale Violence or Late Emergence or Heliocentric, and each of those are based on a model where I worked with David Weinberg to create this installation of these sculptures in which we used what's called the multiverse theory, which just in sense just had its first confirmation a few weeks ago in what's considered the most important, besides the Higgs boson, the most important physical discovery in physics in the past 50 years, which is a confirmation of what they also call inflation theory, but I won't go into that, or I'm not completely sure I could explain it correctly anyway. But essentially, we tried to figure out 5 possible examples of universes that, if you just change the condition very slightly at the beginning of the universe, what kind of universe you get. One of the strange things about cosmology is just that, according to the laws of physics we understand now, if basically the conditions had been even mildly different than they were, there would just be no world. There would be no stars, there would be no galaxies, there would be nothing. One, for example, is called directional structure, and so all of the shots in that chapter of the film are moving in a direction. So as the universe we know now essentially is the same in every direction. There is no direction to it. But it's possible that you could have a universe in which there was a direction. So, for example, a universe which would look a little bit like looking as if there's the Milky Way and then nothing. It's possible. And then the music is also a collaboration with a composer from London, and so then the music also, like that particular chapter, is made with an oboe recording that has the notion of a particular line that moves from one place to another. And then as well, the whole, it turns out that the universe is in F sharp minor. So basically, approximately, essentially they talk about the harmonics of the expansion of the universe, and they talk about gravitational waves, which essentially you can be compared to analogously with sound waves, and it turns out that it's approximately F sharp minor. So the whole film is in F sharp minor, which is a very melancholy tonality and very unusual. It's just not a common key to compose in. So there's all these different layered ideas of the shots, of these proposals for different possible ways of thinking about possible universes, the sense of these objects as if they're floating in a kind of galactic space, and the music, both in terms of melancholiness and aloneness. I mean, part of the idea of just the word island universe. And if you're an island, you're isolated in some sense, you're alone. So all of those things kind of go together and hopefully make an evocative experience that you could read about the history of it, but that on its own, I hope, has some message just on its own. I mean, I've shown it quite a number of times in museums, and mostly as installation, like a big projection in a room, but also in screenings. I think it's a contemplative piece. It's quiet, even though it's grand and dramatic in another way. I think it comes out to be more elegiac about modernism than I perhaps intended. It's the history of those chandeliers is very funny, because so this intuition that I had that it was like a pop image of the Big Bang, well, this turned out to essentially be true. That the guy who designed the Opera House first designed it in 1929, but then the crash happened, it got shelved, and then in 1965 finds himself finishing it and fighting really hard against the traditionalists within the opera community, who did not want a modern building at all, and certainly didn't want the interior to have some 19th century they wanted to have a more 19th century feel to it. So the architect was kind of desperate, and so he was forced to add all these cloth, I think it's called swaging, that he didn't want to do, and it had to have red velvet, which he didn't want to do, and he'd been working with Lobmeyr to do the chandeliers, and basically they had given him, I think, something kind of traditional, because they have done a wide variety of things from, let's say, very, very traditional to, or historic looking, to much more modern things. And so the story goes is this Mr. Roth, Hans Harald Roth, arrives on a Friday, and basically, according to the family lore, arrives, and William K. Harrison, the architect, says, rip up all the drawings, and come back on Monday with a new drawing, whole new idea, and hands him a book on galaxies and astronomy, and the reason why, I believe, is because right then, in the front page of basically every paper in the world, was the discovery of the first physical evidence of the Big Bang. And it was proved Einstein wrong. It was a really huge deal. And basically, it's really it means that we are alone, like that we are absolutely not the center of the world, and certainly not the most important part of the world. So he, I'm sure, read that, and I believe that's why he gave him this book on cosmology and or astronomy, and he wanted him to come back with something that represented that, so that he could have something modern in a way, something that in the Opera House that reflected the change of worldview that this meant, because in terms of the 19th century or 18th, 19th century, in terms of opera, I mean, the Big Bang cosmology is a huge change in terms of outlook. So this is how the story goes. So in that sense, even if I can't prove that it's absolutely the Big Bang cosmology that caused Harrison to do this, it seems a pretty huge coincidence that this is like one of the biggest news stories of the century, and that right after that he's asking to rethink this. So, and of course Mr. Roth's reading this too. So and so then he just made this kind of flower arranging version of this. So that was so I think that there is this connection, and that's also sort of part of my interest. Is, like many artists, I'm interested in the overlap of art and life, and how things influence each other, and how ideas move through the ether and kind of infect everything. And this would be an example of that. And so I tried to evoke that in both the film and in the sculptures. So the sculptures are supposed to look like 60s objects. They're supposed to look like a fallen chandelier in a certain sense, except they're not at all a chandelier, and they have all of this other thing in them. They're something else. One of the important things about the film is that it contains these drawings, and these drawings are they're kind of adapted drawings from the 60s that I took original material and then removed a lot of mathematical information, and left with these very iconic looking design drawings as I thought them, and they look like the chandeliers, and these are actual diagrams of the Big Bang by scientists. And what's interesting is just that it's sort of like almost Jungian in the sense of a kind of like archetypal image, and they're struggling or attempting to visualize something can't be visualized. And because one of the central ideas of the Big Bang cosmology notion is that, or theory or fact, or however you want to put it, is that it's not something expanding into a space, it's space itself expanding. Well, you can't visualize that. Do you know what I mean? In any kind of real way. You can only visualize it as an analogy. And so it was very interesting that these analogies of these ideas also result in forms. And I'm not an artist who proposes that I am coming up with a smart idea. I'm in the sense that I think that there's much about my work that's absurd and contradictory, and that is mostly a reflection or a result of just me, and my own blind spots and idiosyncrasies. So I'm trying to humanize these hard, brittle things somehow, and I don't know if I can do that, but I'm trying to, because I feel like that's important to do. In terms of the melancholy, I think that's, to my mind, something as I'm learning more and more, in a way, is in a sense, arguably the most logical response to life, in the sense that humor is also an expression of melancholy, and humorlessness is maybe could be tied with happiness. Whereas, let's say, humor, it would be tied with sadness, and so, yeah, I mean, the installation Island Universe, it's a little confusing because there's a film called Island Universe and there's an installation called Island Universe. That I think it's fair to say that the experience of the response to Island Universe, especially of the installation, it's been wildly positive, and people find it very captivating and beautiful and exciting and interesting, very daunting. But I was hoping that it would get you to thinking about just simply this idea of the potential of individuality, complexity, difference, just by looking at it. And and I realize that that's asking a lot of people to, but I do absolutely believe that the information is there, and that hopefully some of the beauty of it, or the kind of wow of it, could make you want to spend enough time to do that.